Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Hey friends, we have another exciting guest on this podcast. His name is Michael DePaula. He is with the Libertarian Party in Washington, and he's running for governor. So welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me. Exciting to be here.
We are glad to have you, Michael. I was talking to Michael before the show, and he has a very interesting life. So if you could please give us a brief biographical sketch of your life, we would appreciate it.
Sure. It's I got to pick a starting point, but I'm originally from the West Coast. I'm 45 years old. Live in Seattle. I've been a resident of Washington for the last 7.5 years or so. 3 kids, 3 pets. And we live on our sailboat, actually, here in Seattle, Washington. And, I grew up on the West Coast, born in California, but actually lived on the East Coast most of my elementary and high school years, and then came back to the West Coast, California, for university. And then after graduating, I actually moved overseas. I had a job in Japan with a publishing company.
Oh.
And stayed pretty much over there for the next 15 years or so. Got married, had raised our family. My wife is Japanese. We actually met stateside. But
wow.
I began working with Facebook back in 2013 in Tokyo, and stayed with them there. Ran operations for IT, flying around Asia to manage their IT operations. And then had a chance to transfer out to Seattle, end of 2016, to lead our initial site that we had here, and now it's grown over the last 7 years to about 28 sites. Although since COVID we've been downsizing a bit, but yeah, that's a bit of my background in Washington and kind of why I'm here.
Interesting. So it sounds like living on a boat is a very libertarian thing to do.
Yeah, perhaps. We do have a fairly sizable liveaboard community here at this particular marina. I think there's something about something on the order of 1,500 boats, and I think 10% or so can be liveaboards. But we do see quite a diversity of political opinion here. But in general, you're probably right. A lot of people are kind of can-do. They're very generalist in their personalities. You know, they can understand and deal with a variety of circumstances that come their way.
Cool. Awesome. I've never had anybody on the podcast that has lived in a boat before, so that's a first after all these episodes. So awesome. Good for you.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
So since you lived in Japan, did you learn any Japanese?
I did. I began studying in college. I was initially a music performance major, and while I was passionate about Japanese, probably since high school years, I only had the free time to take a couple classes at the university. So I pretty much self-studied, and then I knew prior to graduation that I wanted to live in Japan and elevate those skills. So I ended up moving over, taking the job, and I speak Japanese fluently, and our kids are bilingual.
Oh, good for them. So is libertarianism a big concept in Japan?
That's an interesting question. I think when we talk about politics, I know Japanese, by the numbers, are actually fairly uninvolved in in voting. The last stats I remember hearing were probably years ago, of course, but I think it was something on the order of 1% to 2%. I could be wrong in the specific number, but only a 1% or 2% vote. Now, residents candidates surely campaign. You see signs, but the participation, that side of it's fairly limited. And I think a lot of it has to do with the type of government they have. Then again, you'll see uprisings against issues that kind of reach this public consciousness level. And people will go out and demonstrate, and it'll even reach mainstream news here in the States. The Japanese take to the streets and protest. I know they did for COVID. They've done so for Trump in various capacities on perhaps for and against WHO involvement, stuff like that. They're passionate when it comes to protests. I would like to see the numbers, and I'll check if that increased the participation at the polls.
Wow, that sounds very low. I never heard anything that low. Wow. So you say for their type of government, how would you describe their government?
Well, it's a parliamentary system, and prior to the war, of course, it was they have an emperor at the top.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
When the war ended, they were, essentially given a constitution, and with that, they have a system of government. With they have prime minister, they've got their legislature. Probably a bit more British in that regard than what American citizens would consider a representative government. But again, I think that perhaps drives the lack of participation. Probably similar to what we see in the UK, where a lot of the appointments and the cabinet positions are more or less out of their control. You'll see the people you'll see campaigning are obviously for local or municipal roles and the diet itself, but that's about it.
Okay, interesting. So for your race in Washington, what are the major platform planks for your campaign?
Yeah, I have two. So just for context, here in Washington State, our current governor, Jay Inslee, has been. We don't have term limits here in the state by our state constitution. So he's served the last 3 terms and decided to, call it quits, so to speak. He's retiring after this year, and his attorney general, Bob Ferguson, is running as Democrat. We also have 2 Republicans who are vying for the seats. We've had some more Democrats enter. At least one of them dropped out that I know of. One is still in, Mark Mullet. And looking at the number of filers, we've got a number from other third parties as well, constitutionalists, independents, and I believe there's actually one other Libertarian. But I know I was the first to file and pay. Largely we've been a progressive state. I think that's fairly well known. And while the state itself is actually split, so some of our counties here, King, Pierce, Spokane, generally they run the state in terms of numbers that end up getting the Democrats in office elected, simply by population. And that largely comes down to the wealth in those 3 counties, and kind of the high tech status that they have. A lot of employees coming into the state work in those 3 counties, whereas the rest of the state tends to be fairly red. But when the Republican Party in the last gubernatorial election surfaced Lauren Culp, that didn't fly. I think I forget what the ratio was, but it was almost double, if I remember correctly, when it came down to the general election. Okay.
So does your party have ballot access status, or did you have to gather signatures to get on the ballot this time?
Yeah, so in Washington State, we have an open primary. And it was actually surprising this year. I want to say it was something like 20 filers for just the gubernatorial position itself.
Oh my.
But you can declare a party. It's optional, but you don't have to essentially file to create an opening for that party. Anyone can run. Now, if you're a Democrat or Republican, those parties themselves have obviously their endorsements that those candidates will run for. But the state itself is open. You can go in, say what you are, and whatever you say you are is what you are. That doesn't necessarily mean you have the endorsement of your party either. And then the top 2 system is those 2 candidates who have the most votes after the primary go on to the general.
Okay. The top 2 open primary. What do you think about that system? That's a reform people want in various areas. So what do you think about it?
It has its pros and cons.
Okay.
I like that ballot access is open, so you can, if you want to run and pay the fee, or in lieu of the fee, if you want to collect signatures. I think it's one signature per dollar that covers the filing fee. So in the gubernatorial race, which would be the most expensive, I believe it's 1% of the office's salary. So you're looking at approximately $2,000. You could theoretically get 2,000 signatures in lieu of paying the filing fee. And that's definitely a pro, right? You see a lot of candidates run, but like any other state, it's such a grueling process that a lot of people, I think, have traditionally backed out when it comes time to the primary. And if they haven't, then they'll certainly fall out after the primary when you have the top two. What's interesting, and it's one of those things where you don't know until you go through it yourself, was the amount of work, of course, running a campaign takes, least of all for the highest office in the state. There's some popular YouTubers in the state that are very open and honest and truthful when they say things like, ultimately money does drive a campaign, and you see, Dave Reichert and Bob Ferguson, who are north of $2 million, I think in one case $4 million in campaign contributions through various sources. It's daunting for a third party to enter that kind of race and have to build up their coffers or get creative, which is kind of our strategy.
Oh, good. So what creative things have you been doing with your campaign then? Yeah,
so in my case, I'm obviously busy living a life working in the private sector. I tried to devote my weekends, although now since our kids all play baseball and it's baseball season, that time to go around and do town halls and Q&As is limited. I've really made an effort, I think, to plan out what that looks like over the course of the summer and ramp up, but also not to not to give false expectations for voters. With my experience in social media, working for Facebook, now Meta, I'm really trying to leverage that experience and utilize online platforms as best as I can. We have I think while the establishment candidates, from the two big parties generally tend to do their big dinners and target their voters, which tend to be, professionals, perhaps 40 years old and older. I'm actually making a targeted choice to go after younger progressive voters. Surely we will have, we have a lot of progressive voters that will vote Democrat on name only, the otherwise low information voters. But what we can do to actually have an educational campaign, I think, works very well with social media. And I've got and I've been talking about it for over a month now, but I've got a series of videos that I plan to debut shortly that will help people make the connection, which, to be frank, is not a connection most people make between progressive ideals and libertarianism. But that's something we want to do, is lead an educational campaign, as well as, of course, ultimately drive the vote in the primary.
Sounds good. It sounds like an efficient use of your resources. We have candidates who run for big areas like yours, and they say it's very hard you can't knock door to door for a governor race. It's not possible.
Correct.
So it sounds like the way you're doing it is the most efficient way to get things done.
Yeah, well, that's the hope. You're right. There's no way you could knock doors. And I mean, I think the Libertarian Party of Washington itself, while still the third largest party in the state, is dwarfed in comparison to the larger two parties. So we really have to get creative out here.
Okay, so you're mentioning that you want to reach out to progressive voters. So what are you telling them to link their beliefs to libertarianism? Yeah, so
I think it goes without saying, a lot of people, if you pulled a random stranger on the street and said, which party do most align libertarianism with, libertarian thinking, or perhaps Libertarian Party itself, a lot of voters would say, well, that's conservative. That's the extreme right, you might even hear.
Sure.
One of the things I'm really making an effort to draw out is A, that not only is that true, but B, it offers us precisely the way forward at the time in which we're living. If you talk to progressive voters who are concerned about access to mental health, about access to affordable housing, about homelessness, about drug use on the streets, problems that we really experience here in our urban centers, libertarianism offers the best solution because we're at a point where we can't continue to tax. We've seen measures that have been raised on the ballot shot down, and the state is at its limit. They can't raise any more money to even combat the increases that inflation has brought in that spending. So now they're faced with either A, getting creative with how they manage their current budget, or B, and I think perhaps more likely, having to curb that budget and use it elsewhere in ways that are more important. So the Libertarian platform kind of flips all this on its head. It says, hey, let's stop playing these back and forth, left and right games and fighting over which areas of our budget should be well funded. Let's acknowledge that it doesn't matter, we don't have the funds at all. And over the next 4 years, not only will those funds go down as people leave the state and seek pastures that are more economically friendly, but we'll see this kind of downward spiral as more businesses close, as companies lay off people, both large and small. And that pool of resources will shrink dramatically. The Libertarian flips that on its head and says, let's get government out of this, all these various ventures and programs that they're funding. Let's return your money to you, pay down our debt, which is first. But I guess while we're doing that, get our money back to the people and have them instead choose those areas in which they want to spend money that align with their values. So
okay.
If access to abortion is your thing, or homeless outreach in any of its various capacities is important to you, there are plenty of organizations that the government themselves are contracting with that citizens can give directly to themselves, or if those organizations or companies offer a service that they can purchase for themselves. There's no point in us having to continue paying a middleman to do that for us and charge us a fee for it when we're perfectly capable of doing that ourselves.
Good point. So it sounds like that's a good way to reach the progressive voters, because they might be inclined to support taxation, yet when you show them that they can do it more efficiently without taxation, they could reconsider.
Yeah. And that's just one issue, right? I mean, on the housing side, people see the net effect of policy decisions over time, but they've never been forced to, because we've been in this growing economy where the cost of money is essentially free. They've never been forced to actually examine the root of those choices and how that can come back to bite them in the butt. And that's what we'll see going forward as the recession deepens. And then just imagine in November, if we see at the national level, if we see a Trump or another Republican perhaps winning, or a non-Democrat, let's say, some of the other concerns that they have when it comes to privacy and free speech and safety and personal defense, now all of those issues that they've been advocating for control of by their party are now weaponized against them. And me as a libertarian is simply raising my hand and saying, hey, this is coming. See what the results of these decisions are now that you've weaponized the power of the state against whoever it chooses. It worked for you while you were in power, but that shoe may be on the other foot.
Okay.
So now is precisely the time to correct those mistakes, return the power back to the people, and prepare for the recession ahead.
Okay. So do you have a team helping you with this race, or are you doing it by yourself?
Can you repeat the question?
Do you have a team helping you with this race, or are you doing it by yourself?
No, this is largely myself. I do have a few advisors within our state party itself, but yeah, this has largely been my effort.
Wow.
I began pondering somewhere after last summer 2023, and I officially filed November of 2023. And it's been my efforts. I've been paying out of pocket. We have had a few donors come in, and I have very concrete plans for those donations in terms of leveraging social media. But yeah, it's been out of pocket and by my hands.
Oh, that's good. That's good. It sounds like you're able to make that work. So, props for that.
Yeah, well, we'll see when the primaries hit in August.
So that's when it is. It's in August, the primary. So then they'll decide the final two to get on the ballot.
Correct. August 6th, and then shortly thereafter, yeah, they'll have their two, and those two will go on to do further interviews and endorsements, and yeah, the general in November.
Okay. So you say there are 20 people that are running for the open primary. Are there other alternative party candidates besides the Libertarian Party?
There are.
Good.
Yeah. So we had, if I recall, and I could be off on this, but we had, I believe, 3 Democrats initially and 2 or 3 Republicans. And then the labels that the others chose were, like I said, independent, moderate, constitutionalist, stuff like that. So there were a lot. And I believe there are still quite a number. I just got the pamphlet back from the PDC with everyone's biographies because we had to submit those. I think the deadline was last week, and yeah, there's a considerable number out there, which is actually good to see. Oh
yeah, definitely. Yep, that's what we love to see. So, are there going to have any candidate debates, or is that after the primaries?
That's after the primaries. There are a number of unofficial ones, and kind of going back to your question about how the two-party system has worked in the state, one of the interesting things I've seen is that straight out of the gate, you'll see major news outlets prominently feature in their polling, the 2 candidates from the top of the Republican and Democratic Party ticket. And it's interesting that they kind of already, narrow people's views through that. And that's something we knew that happened, I suppose, on some level. But it really hits you when you're running and you go, yeah, how come they're not featuring other people in their polling lists? And at the very least, making the public aware that there's other people other than these 2 running. But there are news outlets, there are radio programs, that are letting anyone come in and schedule time.
Okay.
But the polling itself is generally, I think they had to acquiesce because we have a secondary Republican candidate, Semi Bird, who actually, I think, got the endorsement from the state Republican Party, which is a huge upset over Dave Reichert, who is the favored candidate. So now some of the polling you'll see is adding Semi Bird to the list. But yeah, it's largely independent, and what I've seen at the grassroots level is a lot of people on social media asking these news outlets, why aren't you featuring third-party candidates like Michael DePaula, or even Semi Bird in some cases? Why are they still continuing to go with the narrative that there's only 2 people at the top and those are the people we'll talk about? So you're seeing some backlash. I just hope that we see more of it leading into the primary.
Oh, sure. So for these unofficial events, do the Republican candidates and the Democratic candidates bother to come, or do they think it's beneath them?
That's an interesting question. So I have certainly seen a lot of talk about the hosting of these events. I've never actually seen one take place. And maybe that's something that they want to plan towards the end of June or July.
Okay.
But yeah, I've seen at least 4, and I've received no invites, no reach out. I've made contact to a few and let them know, hey, I'm interested in going. But the hosts themselves, maybe they have reached out to the large 2 or 3 candidates. I haven't heard them reach out to me. And yeah, we'll see what happens here.
Okay. So what other candidates are running in your state Libertarian Party?
That's a good question. I don't think the endorsements have officially come back. At the convention, we had, I believe we had two others that gave speeches.
Okay.
And I haven't seen an update. Maybe there is an update. I've been swamped with other information coming in.
Okay, fair
but
enough.
we do, yeah, they tend to be local. We had, I believe, two who were actually voted in office over the last term. Anywhere from a county level position to, to precinct level.
Wow.
But
so they won their races.
Nothing that I've seen at the state level.
Oh, okay. So they won their local races.
Yes.
Oh, good for them. Awesome.
Yeah. What is it nationally? You can go on the Libertarian Party website, lp.org, the national party. I think nationwide we had 330 or 380 some elected libertarians across the U.S.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is maybe 6, 7, no, maybe about 6.5 per state then.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in the total scheme of things, the ratio is off. We need to build it, but that can only come through education. And largely, honestly, I think it's also a product of the time in which we live. I think we'll see more interest in libertarian thinking, even if voters themselves don't recognize that their thoughts are libertarian. And I see that now. I see people express ideas of, limited government, or certainly government that's too large and corrupt and sending money overseas for wars while infrastructure and things here at home collapse. And we see those ideas crop up. I think it's our job as libertarians to point that out and say, hey, that's libertarian thinking. That's what we offer you here. And by the way, here are the other things that we believe that I think you'll agree with.
Oh, sure. Sounds good. So, Michael, how can our audience support you in your campaign?
Yeah, great question. So two things. I mean, if we divide this between people who live in Washington State and people who don't, I think both groups could certainly donate monetarily. But as I've said before, I would be a hypocrite if I didn't acknowledge that these hard economic times we're living in makes that difficult. So I certainly understand if people can't help that way. And I would be the first advocate that they make sure that they take care of themselves and their families first. That said, there's a reason I'm leveraging social media, because I truly believe it's the technology that allows us to flatten what used to be a fairly good old boys network kind of process. So I can't overestimate the importance of liking and sharing if you see or read something that resonates with you on social media. And certainly if you're a resident of the state, or you have family or friends who are, all it takes is a simple, hey, I hear there's a libertarian candidate running. I checked out his website. I really like some of the stuff he's saying. And then pass that along to someone who lives here. That does immense help, perhaps even beyond raising money. One of the things I've really noticed when it comes down to campaign finance is it's good to be honest and upfront that we can't compete. Certainly we could perhaps for some offices, but at the gubernatorial level in a state like Washington, absolutely not. So there's no point in wasting time trying to compete with again, these candidates who have $1, $2, $3, $4 million already raised, and they have a well-oiled machine to continue to raise. So let's acknowledge that and do things that actually work to our advantage early on. For the donations I do receive, I just want to say to the audience, we do have two great plans. One is in the media itself for licensing for audio and video content. That's already taken care of. The second that I'm raising for would be signage campaigns towards the end of next month, in the weeks leading up to August. There are a few key counties in Washington State, as I mentioned, kind of up and down this western corridor, where we would like to get some signs out. But we also feature signage page on our website that people can do themselves as well. You download the file, take it to a local print shop in your town or online, and just put out lawn signs. So those are probably the two biggest. Sounds hokey, but it's true.
Okay. So what is the website address?
Yeah, it's DePaula, that's DEPAULA, for, F-O-R, WA, like the state abbreviation, W-A, Gov, G-O-V, 2024.com. It's DePaula for WA-Gov, 2024.com.
Perfect. I can try to get those in I can get those in the show notes.
Great.
All right, Michael. We thank you for coming on the podcast today and talking about your interesting life as well as your exciting campaign.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I've appreciated the show, listened to some of your episodes, and yeah, thanks for having me.
Sure thing. We wish you all the best in your campaign and everything else you do in your personal and professional life.
Thank you.
All right, take care and all the best.
Bye-bye.